Hello, me and Gimmo back with more game reviews, and today we're discussing and reviewing the game that could have been Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, the game that had potential to be not only a next juggernaut in the skateboarding game genre, but in the sports game genre altogether, but ultimately failed in the end, and we'll explain why. So here we go. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, the game that could have been. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 had potential to be a memorable juggernaut in the skateboarding game genre. It had an awesome skater roster with a lot of awesome skaters wearing some fashionable gear. It had the barracks level gameplay graphics that were a nod to the old classic era Pro Skater games, a special meter that you could activate at will and didn't deplete on its own before you could use it, and it was marketed as a return to the classic arcade skateboarding era that Tony Hawk fans were deeply desiring to return to. However, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was doomed from the start. So here's why. Before Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 was in development, Activision had licensed the Tony Hawk Pro Skater brand to Robomoto to develop Tony Hawk Ride and Tony Hawk Shred, because Neversoft, the original creators of the Tony Hawk games, had moved on to make Guitar Hero. So in 2014 or so, Activision realized that the Tony Hawk Pro Skater game copyright and brand name would expire within a year in 2015 or so, and for one last essentially cash grab, Activision hired Robomoto to develop Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, which they would market as a faithful return to the classic Tony Hawk Pro Skater game era, which Tony Hawk fans were deeply desiring. However, Robomoto only had a year to develop and release the game before the Tony Hawk Pro Skater brand copyright expired, and so corners were cut. For instance, Robomoto had never made an arcade-style skateboarding game before. They had only made Tony Hawk Ride and Tony Hawk Shred, where you essentially stand on the board. So instead of taking time to learn how to create in-game gameplay and control mechanics look, feel, act like the classic Tony Hawk games, Robomoto was rushed for time until they adopted the gameplay and control mechanics from the Tony Hawk Ride and Tony Hawk Shred games into Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. The result being a glitchy mess. For example, the skater gameplay mechanics weren't smooth at all. The skater would shoot into the air when olling, look goofy and glitchy when landing on the ground. The skater spins were too slow, and some tricks looked goofy when performed, which led to a non-realistic look and feel from the game. Another thing that was rushed was the choice of levels and their designs, because other than the barracks level, all other Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 levels looked cheap and half-assed, and also looked like they were made with a 20-year-old park editor. There were no imagination when it came to level design, but while some levels were overall interesting and some were imaginative, they overall lacked imagination and inspiration, like Robomoto just didn't have any good ideas or playable levels that hadn't already been done in the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series or the other Tony Hawk games. Then, within a few months into production, Activision told Robomoto they had less than a year to finish Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 instead of almost a year or so as originally planned. So, more stuff was rushed and more corners were cut. Another thing that pissed off the Tony Hawk community was that the in-game graphics for Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 looked like they were 15 years old, like they were pre-2004. This was supposed to be an updated game on a next-gen console, and the graphics, they said, looked like they were pre-2004. However, I saw these old-style graphics as a tribute, a nod if you will, to the old classic era Tony Hawk Pro Skater games. And another thing the community didn't like about Pro Skater 5 was the soundtrack. While it had some decent tracks, a lot of fans felt the soundtrack was meh at best. And another thing the community didn't like was that you couldn't bail while grinding, and they said they missed that. But come on, really? Really? No one likes bailing. The only time anyone liked bailing was Tony Hawk Underground 2 and Tony Hawk's American Wasteland, when bailing was fun because you could smash the board with your head or with your feet or toss it, throw it against something, or break it in a whole bunch of different interesting and unique ways. And that was the only time people liked bailing in those two games. But other than that, let's be reasonable, not just make stuff up. Nobody likes bailing. In the Pro Scare series and then all the other games, nobody likes bailing. So the only time we liked bailing was Underground 2 and American Wasteland. So, come on, let's not make stuff up. So, in the end, between glitchy gameplay, boring levels, outdated graphics, shitty gameplay mechanics, a mid-at-best soundtrack, failure to revive the nostalgia of classic-era Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, and a few other things, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 failed to be a successful endeavor. In fact, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was such a massive flop that Robomoto went out of business within a year after its release. And then within a year or two after its release, the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 game servers were officially shut down and turned off forever. And all the game developers and Robomoto executives have now disowned the game. In fact, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was such a massive flop that not only was it labeled 2015's worst skateboarding game of the year, but in 2019, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 was named the worst video game of the decade. Ouch. Talk about rubbing salt into the wound. I mean, ouch. And I feel bad for all the skaters involved in the game because for some of them, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was their first and only video game they were in. Ouch. That's gotta hurt. That's gotta sting. Talk about rubbing salt into the wounds. So in the end, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 has potential to be the next big title in not only the Tony Hawk Pro Skater game series, but in the skateboarding video game genre altogether. However, its rushed development leading to its failures cemented a game that had potential into a massive flop. So in hindsight, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 had potential to be great, but ultimately in the end, failed to achieve such success and will go down history as a stain not only on the Tony Hawk Pro Skater brand, but the skateboarding game genre as a whole. So in the end, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 will ultimately go down history as the game that will ultimately fade away into our subconscious as the game that could have been. So that's why I feel Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 had potential to be a great game, but ultimately failed in the end and will ultimately one day just fade away into our subconscious and be forgotten as the game that could have been. So that's all. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.